The field was still dark at 0540, the kind of blue-gray dark that has already decided to become morning but has not told the grass yet. And I stood at the edge of it with a rucksack on my back and a running blade where my left foot used to be, waiting for a man with a clipboard to decide whether I was allowed to exist. He had not looked at me yet. Not really. He had looked at the space around me the way busy men look at furniture that has been left in a doorway. There were 40 soldiers formed up on the parade field behind him, their breath rising in little clouds, and there was a folding table with a coffee urn and a stack of competitor bibs, and there was me, a woman he had not accounted for, standing at the line with a prosthetic leg, catching the first weak light off the flagpole. I had learned a long time ago that the loudest man on a field is rarely the one carrying the most. I had learned it the way you learn most true things, which is to say slowly and against my own preference, and at a price. So I did not announce myself. I did not walk up to the table and make a case for my presence. I simply stood at the line the way you stand when you have stood at a great many lines and have stopped needing any of them to welcome you. The captain finished whatever he was writing and lifted his head and finally let his eyes land on me. And I watched the small machinery behind his face sort me into a category. Older than the privates. Not in uniform, not the working kind anyway. Just the gray army physical training shirt and the black shorts and the ruck. And then the leg. His gaze snagged on the blade the way everyone's does, and I saw the exact moment he decided that the leg told him everything he needed to know. "Ma'am, this is a closed event," he said, and his voice was pitched to carry, which is a choice a certain kind of man makes without ever knowing he is making it. Registration for the run was last week. If you're here for the memorial dedication, spectators wait over by the reviewing stand. "I'm registered," I said. He smiled. It was not a cruel smile exactly. That was almost the worst of it. It was the easy, unbothered smile of a man who has never once in his life had to wonder whether he belonged somewhere. "This is a 12-mile ruck," he said. 45 pounds, dry. It's not a walk. I don't want anyone getting hurt out there." "I understand the distance," I said. Behind him, one of the privates in the front rank turned her head just slightly, the way you do when you are 19 and you can feel a thing going wrong and you do not yet have the rank or the nerve to name it. She was small and square-shouldered, and her helmet was a size too big, and her name tape, when I got close enough later to read it, said Boone. She was watching the captain the way you watch weather. The captain stepped closer, and he did the thing that I have come to recognize as the tell of a man who thinks he is being kind. He lowered his voice, which only made the next part louder in the way that matters. "Look," he said, and he nodded at the blade. "Careful, sweetheart. That leg looks brand new. Try not to embarrass yourself out there. There's no shame in doing the 2-mile fun run instead. It's on the same course, first loop only." I have been called sweetheart on a great many mornings by a great many men who would have swallowed their own tongues if they had known who they were talking to, and I have made a study over the years of what to do with the word when it lands. You cannot give it back. It has already been said in front of whoever heard it, and the people who heard it have already begun to arrange themselves around it. So you do not give it back. You set it down. You let it sit there on the cold grass between you, and you decline to pick it up. And eventually, its own weight makes it look like exactly what it is. "Where's competitor check-in?" I said. Not a question, really. A destination. Something in the flatness of it made him hesitate, but only for a second, and then he pointed at the folding table with his pen. "Sergeant Kessler will get you a bib for the fun run," he said. 2 miles. You'll be fine." 12. I said, and I walked past him to the table, and I did not limp, because I had spent 13 years learning how not to give men like him the satisfaction of watching me limp, and I got my bib, and I pinned it to my shirt, and I went back to the line. The captain had already forgotten me. That is the part people never believe when I tell this story later, that he simply turned back to his clipboard and his formation and forgot me entirely, the way you forget a thing you have filed. But I did not need him to remember me. I was not there for him. I cinched the ruck a notch tighter against the small of my back, and I checked the pin lock at my knee with 2 fingers the way you check a rifle you already know is loaded, and I looked out at the tree line where the course disappeared into the dark, and the field thought it had my measure. It did not. People think the hard part is the leg. I have stopped correcting them, mostly because the correction takes longer than anyone wants to listen, and it makes the correcting sound like complaint, and I am not built for complaint. But the truth, if you want it, is that the leg is the easy part. The leg is a settled question. The hard part is the hour before the leg, the hour nobody sees. That morning, I had been awake since 0400. I had sat on the tailgate of my truck in the far corner of the parking lot with the dome light on and gone through the ritual that has become as ordinary to me as other people's coffee. The liner first rolled up over the residual limb with the care you would give a wound, even though it is not a wound anymore, has not been a wound for years, is just the shape my body settled into. Then the socket, then the pin, the small mechanical click of it seating, a sound I could pick out of a crowded room, then the standing up, the first weight, the honest little conversation my body has with the ground every single morning about whether today is going to be a good day or a day I get through. That morning the conversation had gone well. Some mornings it does not. On the days it does not, I go anyway, and no one at any finish line has ever been able to tell the difference, which is either a testament to discipline or to how little most people are actually watching. I have decided not to decide which. There's a whole history I could give you of gates if you had the time for it. Not the metaphor, the actual gates. The airman at a flight line in the second year after the leg who told me the visitor parking was around the other side before he saw the placard on my dashboard and went the specific shade of gray that people go. The civilian receptionist at a headquarters building who slid me a clipboard for the Wounded Warrior Support Group when I had come to brief the general who ran the place. The teenager at a hardware store who offered me the senior discount, which was its own kind of gate and its own kind of instruction, because the leg makes people do arithmetic about you and the arithmetic always comes out wrong. I have been the answer to a math problem that a stranger set up incorrectly more times than I could count, and I stopped at some point being interested in correcting the stranger's arithmetic. It is not my job to teach every person who miscounts me how to count. It is only my job to go on being the number I actually am, and to let the ones who care to get it right eventually do the work themselves. That is not bitterness. I want to be careful about that, because the story would be easier to tell if I let it curdle into bitterness, and it never has, and I am a little proud of that, which is maybe the only vanity I have left. It is not bitterness, it is just accounting. You learn what things cost and you decide, cold and clear, which ones you're willing to pay for and which ones you're going to walk past. And once you have made that ledger honest, a stranger at a gate cannot take much from you, because you already know the exact price of everything he might try to charge. I did not do any of that so that a man named on a clipboard could wave me toward a 2-mile fun run. I want to be clear about that because it would be a tidier story if I had come to that field to prove something to Captain Bryce Latham, and it would be a lie. I did not know his name yet. I did not care to. He was scenery. He was the particular piece of scenery that stands at every gate I have ever approached, and I had learned to walk past that piece of scenery the way you walk past a no parking sign, which is to say with full awareness that it is there and full confidence that it does not apply to you. What I had learned in 13 years of being the woman that men like him wave off of fields was that the wanting to explain yourself is the trap. The moment you begin to explain, you have agreed to the premise that your presence requires explanation. And it does not. My presence has never once required explanation. It has required, at most, the patience to wait for the room to catch up. And patience is the one thing they gave me for free in the recovery ward, whether I wanted it or not. The private, Boone, drifted over while I was adjusting my straps. She did it the way soldiers do when they want to talk to you, but have not decided they are allowed. Orbiting closer in a series of small errands that did not need doing. She checked her own ruck, she retied a boot that was already tied. And then she was standing next to me, and she said, quietly, not looking at me, "You really doing the 12, ma'am?" "I am," I said. "Captain said the last hill's a bad one." She said it like a warning and an apology braided together. "They usually are," I said. "That's why they put them last." She almost smiled. She was 19, maybe 20, and she had the particular tightness in her shoulders that I recognized because I had worn it myself at her age. The tightness of a person who has been told, in 100 small ways, that she was let into a room by mistake and had better not make anyone regret it. I know that tightness the way you know your own handwriting. You'll be fine on the hill, I told her, because it was true, and because someone had told me the same thing once on a worse morning, and I had never forgotten how much it had cost me to believe them and how much it had been worth. Steady beats fast. You keep a pace you can hold, and you don't stop at the bottom to look up at it. Looking up at it is how it beats you. She nodded like I had handed her something she could keep in a pocket. Then she went back to the line, and I watched her go, and I thought, not for the first time, that I had not come to that field for the captain, and I had not come for myself. I had come for a name that was going to be read aloud in about 40 minutes, and I had come to walk 12 miles with it, and the captain and the clipboard and the word sweetheart were simply the weather I would have to cross to do it. The name was Milo Hartley, and to explain the name, I have to take you back to the year 2013, to a road in Afghanistan that did not have a name either. Just a grid reference and a reputation. And to the last morning I had 2 feet. I was 28. I was a captain then, a real captain, the Army kind, which is a company-grade officer, and not the naval kind that commands a ship. And I mention the distinction only because it will matter later in a way I did not plan. I had a platoon's worth of trucks under me on a route clearance escort, which is the job of babysitting the engineers who find the bombs before the bombs find everyone else. And it is slow, patient, boring work right up until the single instant it becomes the loudest thing that will ever happen to you. My driver was a specialist named Danny Merck, 22 years old, from a town in the middle of the country that he described to me on long drives with a homesickness so plain it was almost a smell. My gunner was Milo Hartley, also a specialist, also 22, and Milo was the kind of soldier who made the truck bearable, who kept up a running commentary from the turret about everything and nothing, who had a laugh that came up out of him whole and unembarrassed. On the good days I told him to keep the noise down. I would give a great deal now to have one more day of telling him to keep the noise down. The bomb was under the lead vehicle, which was mine. I do not remember the sound. People expect you to remember the sound, and I never have. What I remember is the way the world tilted and went white and then came back wrong, at an angle, with the smell of diesel and copper, and something underneath that I will not describe because there is no reason for you to carry it too. I remember that Merck was screaming and pinned, and that his door was folded in on him like paper, and I remember that I could not feel my left leg, and I remember deciding, in the clean, cold way you decide things when the ordinary part of your mind has gone quiet, that I would deal with the leg later. I got Merck out. I want to tell you that, plainly and without decoration, because it is the one part of that day I have made peace with. I got the door open, and I got him free, and I dragged him clear, and I did it on a leg that was, I would learn in the next hour, not going to come with me the rest of the way. That part I do not regret, and have never regretted, and it is the reason I can still look at myself in the small hours. Milo, I did not get. The turret took the worst of it. There are versions of that morning I have run 10,000 times in which I am faster, or closer, or turned the other way, and in none of them does it change. And I know that now, the way you know a fact you have finally stopped arguing with, and it does not help as much as you would think. They gave me a bronze star with a V device for valor, and a purple heart for the leg, and I have worn neither of them more than a handful of times, because a medal for the day you lost a man you were supposed to bring home is a strange thing to pin to your chest, and I have never fully known where to put my face while people admire it. There is a thing that happens in the minutes after, that I have never told many people, because it sounds like something invented for effect, and it was not. In the minutes after the blast, sitting on the ground, with Merck breathing beside me and my own leg, a fact I had not yet fully consulted, I was calm. Not brave. Calm, which is different and stranger. The loud, ordinary part of the mind, the part that panics and narrates and bargains, had simply switched off, and in its place was a quiet clerk who processed tasks in order. Airway, bleeding, pressure, radio. The clerk did not care about the leg, because the leg was not yet a task, it was a condition, and conditions wait. I have met that clerk exactly twice in my life, that morning and one other. And I have come to think of it as the truest thing the Army ever gave me, truer than the rank or the medals, the ability to become, for a few minutes, a person who does the next necessary thing in the correct order while the world burns. I have spent 13 years trying to be a little more like that clerk on ordinary days, and mostly failing, because it turns out the clerk only shows up when everything is already lost, and refuses all other invitations. The recovery took the better part of 2 years. I learned to walk again in a long, bright hallway that smelled of disinfectant and other people's grief, alongside men and women who were teaching their own bodies the same argument I was teaching mine. There was a retired sergeant first class in that hallway, older than the rest of us, who had lost more of his leg than I had lost to mine, and who used to ruck the hospital corridors at night with a sandbag and a school backpack because the physical therapists would not yet let him load a real ruck. The staff thought he was a little unhinged. I thought he was the sanest man in the building. He was the one who told me, one night when I was sitting on the polished floor having a private argument with the fact of my life, to stop looking at the top of the hill. He did not mean a hill. He meant all of it, the whole impossible grade of the years ahead, the career I was told was over, and the body I was told to grieve. Look at the ground 6 feet ahead, he said. Give it one step, then another one. I did not know, that night, that I was being handed the only sentence I would ever really need, or that I would spend the rest of my life handing it to other people on other hills. And at the end of it, when the medical board convened to decide whether the army was finished with me, I stood in front of them on a leg that was 3 weeks old, and I made the case that it was not. They had expected me to leave. Almost everyone had expected me to leave. It is remarkable, the number of people who will decide the shape of your future for you and then be genuinely surprised when you decline to live inside it. I did not leave. I stayed. I made major, and then years later I made lieutenant colonel. And along the way, Milo's old battalion started an annual ruck in his name. A 12-mile memorial with his surname on the guidon and a stone at the finish with his rank and his dates cut into it. For years I had known about it, and for years I had not come, because coming meant standing at that finish, and I had not been ready. And readiness is not a thing you can order up on a schedule. It arrives when it arrives, or it does not. This year it had arrived. This year I had picked up the phone and asked the battalion commander if there was a bib for me, and she had gone quiet on the line and then said, in a voice that had gotten careful, that yes, ma'am, of course there was. So that is why I was standing at that line in the blue-gray dark while a captain called me sweetheart. Not to be seen. To carry a name up a hill it had earned. Nobody at the start line knew that yet. In about half an hour, all of them would. The thing that changed the morning did not come from me. I want that on the record because people who hear this story like to imagine that I engineered it, that I stood at that line holding a secret like a card and waited for the perfect moment to lay it down. I did not. I had, in fact, resolved to lay nothing down at all. I was going to ruck the 12 miles as an anonymous bib number and let the dedication be about Milo and drive home. And if Captain Latham went to his grave, thinking he had waved a lost civilian toward the fun run, that was a price I was entirely willing to pay. What changed the morning was a command sergeant major named Walt Guthrie, and he changed it by doing his job, which was walking the line. He was a big man gone gray at the temples, 49 years old, with the particular unhurried gravity that senior enlisted men acquire after enough years of being the actual load-bearing wall of an organization that officers get to take credit for. He came down the ranks the way those men do, a word here, a hand on a shoulder there, checking gear without seeming to check it. And the formation stood a little straighter as he passed, the way a field of wheat leans when the wind decides to walk through it. He reached the end of the front rank, and he saw me, and I watched his face do the thing that Latham's had not done. He saw the gray PT shirt and the ruck and the blade, and for exactly 1 second he sorted me the way everyone sorts me, and then something underneath the sorting caught. Some snag of memory, some line in a file he had read, or a photograph he had seen, or a story he had been told, and his whole face changed. It went still. The unhurried gravity got heavier and quieter, and he came to a kind of attention that had nothing to do with regulation, the attention one person pays another when he understands, suddenly and completely, exactly whom he is standing in front of. "Ma'am," he said, just that. But he said it the way you say a word you have been saving. "Sergeant Major," I said. "I didn't know they'd gotten you to come." His voice had dropped into something private, meant for the two of us and not the field. "We put your name in the program every year. I never thought." He stopped. He was not a man who ran out of words often, and I could see it costing him. "It's an honor," he said finally, and he meant it in the old way, the way that has weight. "It's Milo's morning," I said. "Let's keep it his." He held my eyes for a moment, and I could see him understanding what I was asking, and I could see him not entirely wanting to grant it. Because a part of him wanted to turn to that whole formation and tell them what they were standing next to. But he was a professional to the marrow, and he gave me the smallest nod, and then he turned and he looked at Captain Latham across 20 feet of frostbitten grass, and his face changed again into something a great deal harder. "Sir," Guthrie said, "a word." Latham was mid-sentence with his sergeant, going over the course markings, and he did not look up right away. "Give me a second, Sergeant Major." "Sir?" Guthrie did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Certain men can put a full stop into a single syllable, a period so heavy it lands like a hand on the back of your neck. "Now, please." That got Latham's head up. He looked at Guthrie, and then, because Guthrie's eyes flicked toward me and then away, he looked at me, and I saw the first hairline crack run through the easy confidence on his face. He did not understand yet, but he had spent enough years around men like Walt Guthrie to know that when that particular man walks that particular distance to say a word to you, the word is going to cost you something, and you are going to have to stand there and pay it. The morning had tilted on its axis. Latham felt the tilt before he understood the reason for it, which is, I have found, the ordinary sequence. First the ground moves, only later do you learn what moved it. Here's the part of the story I am least able to make anyone understand, so I will just tell it and let it sit. For about 90 seconds, I held the whole thing in my hand. Guthrie had stepped a few paces off with Latham, close enough that I could hear the low, urgent shape of it, and I understood that the sergeant major was, at that moment, deciding how to handle me the way you handle unexploded ordnance, carefully, with a clear idea of how much damage was possible. And I understood that if I wanted it, I could have had Captain Bryce Latham's entire morning. I could have let Guthrie march him over to me for a public apology in front of his formation. I could have stood there with my arms crossed and made him say the word, "sweetheart," back to himself with 40 soldiers watching and a lieutenant colonel's rank sitting invisible on my shoulders. I had earned that. If anyone has ever earned the right to a small, clean revenge, it was me, on that field, in that cold. I want you to know that I felt the pull of it. People who tell you they feel no pull toward that kind of thing are either lying or have never been humiliated in front of people who matter. And I have been, more times than I can count, and the pull is real, and it is warm, and it whispers that this once you have every right. But I have also learned what taking costs. I have watched people take their clean, small revenges, and I have watched what it does to them over the following years. How the taking becomes a habit, and then a character. How a person who was wronged once can spend the rest of a life collecting on it from people who were not even there. And I had spent 13 years learning not to become that, because becoming that would have been the one thing the bomb could not do to me on its own. It needed my help to make me small and bitter, and I had declined every single morning to help it. Guthrie came back to me. Latham stayed where the sergeant major had left him, and I could see that he had been told something, not everything, just enough, and that he was standing very still inside it. "Ma'am," Guthrie said, low, "say the word, and I'll have him off the line, and the executive officer running the start in 2 minutes, nobody would blink." "No," I said. "He needs to hear it in front of them. Respectfully, ma'am, those young soldiers heard him call you that. They need to see it land." He was not wrong. That was the difficult part. He was not wrong about what those soldiers needed to see. Boone was still in the front rank, and I thought about her, about the tightness in her shoulders, about all the mornings ahead of her when some other man with the clipboard would decide she had been let into the room by mistake. She did need to see something land, but there is more than one way for a thing to land. It can land like a blow, which teaches fear, or it can land like a fact, which teaches something sturdier. And I have come to trust facts. Facts do not need me to be cruel in order to do their work. They simply need to be allowed into the room, and then they arrange everyone else without any help from me. "The dedication," I said. "Who reads it?" "Colonel Anand, the battalion commander." Guthrie's mouth moved into something that was almost a smile as he understood where I was going. "It's written already. It's got your action in it. Specialist Hartley and the officer who pulled Sergeant Merck out of that truck. Your name's in the citation line." "Then read it the way Milo earned it," I said. "Don't read it for me. Read it for him, exactly as written, and let it fall where it falls." Guthrie looked at me for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and there was respect in it that had nothing to do with my rank and everything to do with the choice, and that is the only kind of respect I have ever fully trusted. I looked past him at the line, at the 40 soldiers stamping their feet against the cold, at the stone I could just make out at the far edge of the field with its cut letters catching the strengthening light. The truth was already loaded. It was already written down and about to be spoken aloud, my name and Milo's name in the same sentence, and the whole field would hear it. I did not have to do a single thing except stand where they had told me to stand and let it come. So that is what I decided. Not to strike, to stand, to hold my place in the ranks like any other competitor and let the morning tell the truth in its own voice. I towed the line beside the soldiers who had watched me be called sweetheart, and I set my watch, and I did the small, honest arithmetic that only I could do, which was to calculate what 12 miles was going to cost the leg. The answer was a good deal. The socket fits well on a normal day, but 12 miles under a 45-pound ruck is not a normal day. It is a long argument between my body and the ground, and I knew that somewhere around mile 8, the skin at the base of the residual limb would begin to blister, and that by mile 10 the blister would have opened, and that I would finish the last 2 miles on something that hurt in a specific bright way I have a long acquaintance with. I knew all of that with total clarity, the way you know the terms of a contract you have signed before. I signed it anyway. I have signed it before. There is a version of courage that is loud, and there is a version that is just the willingness to keep a promise to a dead man at a known price. And I have only ever been capable of the second kind. I have noticed that people want courage to feel like a decision made in a bright flash, a moment of rising music and squared jaw. In my experience, it has never once felt like that. It has felt like arithmetic done in the cold. You count what a thing will cost, and you count what it is worth. And if the second number is larger, you do the thing. And you do it without any music at all, because the music is for movies, and the cold is for mornings. The blister at mile 8 was a known quantity. The name on the stone was a known quantity. The second number was larger. That was the whole of the courage, if you want to call it that. And I would not have called it that. I would have called it Tuesday. Guthrie moved to the front of the formation and called them to attention, and the stamping stopped, and the field went quiet, except for the flag snapping once, twice, on its line. Somewhere behind us, a vehicle door closed. The sun had cleared the tree line now, and the frost on the grass was beginning to let go of it, silvering and then vanishing, and the light came in, low and gold and merciless, the way early light does, laying every face bare. I did not accept an escort to the front. Guthrie had offered, with his eyes, one more time, and I had declined with mine. I did not want the front. The front is for people who need to be seen crossing first, and I have never needed that, and anyway, Milo would have laughed at me for it, would have called me sir in that mocking fond way he had, and told me to get back in the ranks with the rest of the animals. I stayed in the ranks with the rest of the animals. I stood between a private who could not have been 20 and a sergeant twice his size, and I waited. Captain Latham had taken his place off to the side, and I could feel him not looking at me, which is a very particular thing to be able to feel. A person aiming their eyes so carefully away from you that the avoidance becomes its own kind of stare. Guthrie had told him something. Not the citation, not the whole shape of it, but enough that the man was standing in a small, private storm, running back through the last 20 minutes, hearing his own voice say the word again, watching it get worse each time he replayed it. I felt, I will admit, a flicker of something toward him then. Not warmth, but the beginning of the understanding that would later become the thing I gave him. He was going to have to stand there and listen to the dedication just like everyone else. And he was going to learn who I was in the same breath as the whole field. In public, with no chance to prepare his face. There is a cruelty in that, an accidental one, and I had chosen not to add to it. That would have to be enough of a mercy for now. The rest of it, if there was going to be any rest of it, would have to be walked for, over 12 miles, the same as everything else worth having. Colonel Annan walked to the microphone at the reviewing stand with a folded page in her hand. Lieutenant Colonel Priya Anand was a compact, deliberate woman of about my own age, and she carried herself like someone who had spent a career being careful with words, because she had learned what they cost when you were careless. She unfolded the page. She looked out at the formation, and then for just a moment her eyes found me at the line, and I saw her understand that I had come, and I saw her decide to honor what I had asked, which was to read it plain. Every year, she began, and her voice carried clear across the cold field. "We ruck these 12 miles for Specialist Milo Hartley. Some of you are new and did not know him. That does not matter this morning. This morning you will carry his name, whether you knew him or not, because that is what we do. We carry the ones who cannot carry themselves." The field was silent. Even the flag seemed to hold. "On the 3rd of a month, I will not name, in a year some of you were children, Specialist Hartley was a gunner on a route clearance escort when the lead vehicle struck a buried explosive." She read it steadily, without drama, which made it land harder than any drama could have. "The vehicle was destroyed. The driver was pinned and gravely wounded. Specialist Hartley was killed at his post. And the officer in that lead vehicle, herself gravely wounded, freed the pinned driver and dragged him to safety before she would allow anyone to treat her own injuries. That officer lost her left leg below the knee. She was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device and the Purple Heart. Her name is Lieutenant Colonel Maren Ostrander." She paused, and then she said the sentence that I had not known she would add, that was not in the citation, that she must have decided to say in the moment, looking at me. "She's standing in your ranks this morning. She came to ruck it with you." I kept my eyes on the tree line. It is easier than watching people rearrange their faces. I have learned that if you fix your gaze on something at the horizon, some fixed and indifferent thing, like a tree line, or a flagpole, or a far building, you do not have to watch the exact moment when 40 people turn to look at you, and you do not have to decide what to do with your own expression. You can just be a woman looking at a tree line while the field reorganizes itself around a fact. But I heard it. You cannot help but hear it. The particular sound a formation makes when it turns its head all at once. The soft mass creak of gear and boot and breath, and then the silence after, which is a different silence than before, thicker, aware. I heard the private next to me exhale. I heard, somewhere off to the side, Captain Latham make a small sound, barely a sound at all, the sound a man makes when the floor of his morning gives way beneath him. I let my eyes come off the tree line then, because it would have been cowardice to keep them there forever, and I looked at the field, and 40 faces were turned toward me, and on every one of them was the same expression rearranging itself, the expression of people recalculating in real time everything they had assumed 20 minutes ago. And in the front rank, Private Boone was looking at me with her lips slightly parted and her too big helmet and tears standing in her eyes that she was furious at herself for, and I gave her the smallest nod, the same one I had given her earlier, the one that said steady, "You're fine. Keep your pace." Captain Latham had gone the color of the frost that was leaving the grass. He took a step toward me before he knew he was doing it, his mouth already moving. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice had lost every ounce of the carry it had had before. I didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't." He stood there, with the rest of the apology stuck behind his teeth, and Guthrie's eyes found him and held him, not unkindly but immovably, a look that said, "This is not the time, Captain. This morning does not belong to your feelings about yourself." And Latham understood it, and closed his mouth, and stood there in the wreckage of his own assumption, with nowhere to put his hands. The starter horn sounded, and I stepped off the line with the pack, and the reckoning stopped being a moment and became a road. 12 miles is a long time to carry a thing you have just set down in public. I do not mean the ruck. I mean everything else. We went out across the field and onto the trail that dropped down toward the creek, 40 soldiers and me, and for the first mile there was the ordinary chaos of a ruck start, the fast ones surging ahead who would pay for it later, the packs jostling for the width of the trail, the early bravado. I did not surge. I have never surged in my life. I set the pace I knew I could hold for 12 miles under load on a socket that would blister, which is a pace that looks unimpressive for the first 3 miles and then begins, quietly, to eat everyone who went out too fast. The blade found its rhythm on the packed dirt, a small, clean click at each stride that I have long since stopped hearing as anything but the sound of my own forward motion. There is a myth that the blade is an advantage, that it gives back energy like a spring, and there's a grain of truth in it on a smooth track with no weight, and there is no truth in it at all on a rutted trail under a ruck where every uneven strike is a negotiation, and the socket takes the argument in the soft tissue that was never designed to take it. But I have made this negotiation 10,000 times. My body and I know the terms. We walked. By mile 3, the field had sorted itself into its true order, and I was not at the back. That surprised some of them, I think. Soldiers who had blown past me at the start were sitting on the side of the trail at mile 3, retching up their pride. And I walked past them at my unimpressive pace. And I did not say anything, because there is nothing to say. And saying it would have been a small cruelty, and I was done with cruelties for the day. There were things to see out there that had nothing to do with me, and I let myself see them, because a ruck is one of the few places left in a life where your only job is to move forward and pay attention. The frost coming off the low ground in a thin ground-level fog that the sun burned through by degrees. A hawk working the tree line, patient, doing its own unimpressive-looking arithmetic that came out right every time. A soldier ahead of me who had rigged his ruck wrong and was paying for it in a hot spot on his left shoulder. That would be a wound by mile 10, and who would not stop to fix it because stopping felt like failing, which is the exact wrong lesson that the exact wrong instructors keep teaching. I wanted to tell him to stop for 90 seconds and fix the strap and save himself 2 hours of ruin, but he was not mine to teach, and some lessons a person has to be ready for, so I filed it and walked on. Captain Latham was on the course. He had to be. The company commander sweeps his own event, moving up and down the column, and so somewhere around mile 4, I became aware of him falling in behind me, and then, after a while, beside me, matching my pace, which he did not have to do and which I understood immediately, was the beginning of a penance he did not yet know how to perform. He did not speak for a long time. We walked. The creek was loud on our right and then quiet as the trail climbed away from it. Finally, he said, to the trail ahead of us, and not to me, "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "You don't need it out here," I said. "It's a ruck, not a formation." He absorbed that. Then he said, "What I said back there. There's no version of it that isn't." He stopped, started again. "I've been trying to build the apology for 4 miles, and every version I build is about me, about how bad I feel. And I keep hearing my drill sergeant in my head, saying that an apology that's about how you feel isn't an apology, it's asking for comfort." I looked at him for the first time in a while. He was younger than I had let myself see at the start line, when he had just been the piece of scenery at the gate. Early 30s, maybe, old enough to command a company, and young enough to still be figuring out what the command was for. "Your drill sergeant was right," I said. "Yes, ma'am." He walked a few strides with it. "Can I ask you something, ma'am? And you can tell me it's none of my business." "You can ask." "How do you not hate us?" He said it fast, like a thing he had to get out before he lost the nerve. "People like me, the gate, the hole. How do you walk up to 40 men every morning knowing one of them's going to do what I did and not hate every one of them on principle?" It was a better question than I had expected from him, and I gave it the honest answer, which is the only kind worth the breath. "Because hating you would be a full-time job," I said, "and I already have one. Hate is expensive. It costs more than it ever pays." I watched men in that hospital hallway spend everything they had left on hating the war, or the enemy, or the surgeon, or God, and I watched it eat them down to nothing, and the war never once noticed. You want to know the actual secret? I don't have the surplus. I spent my surplus getting the leg to work and getting back in the fight and learning to sleep again. There's nothing left over for hating strangers at gates. So I don't, not as a virtue, as a budget. So don't make it about how you feel. We crested a small rise and the trail flattened, and I let a little more of my mind off the leg, because the flat is where you rest without stopping. You want to know what you actually did? It wasn't the word. The word is nothing. Men have been calling me sweetheart at gates my whole career, and I've buried better men than the ones who did it. What you did was decide in one look that the most obvious thing about me was the truest thing about me. You saw the leg and you closed the file. That's the part worth fixing, not because of me. Because you're going to command soldiers, and half of what a soldier is you can't see from the gate. He walked with that for a while. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And this time it was different, quieter, a man writing something down inside himself. Around mile 9 we came to the last hill, and the last hill was as bad as its reputation, a long, ugly grade that the course designer had clearly placed there out of spite or wisdom. And near the bottom of it I found Private Boone. She was stopped, That was the problem. She had done the exact thing I had told her at the start line not to do. She had stopped at the bottom and looked up at it, and now the hill had her, the way it always has you once you stop and look up. Her ruck straps had cut into her shoulders, and her face was wet, and she was standing there staring up at the grade like it was a thing that had been done to her personally. I did not stop next to her because stopping is contagious and I would have caught it too. I came up beside her at my unimpressive pace, and I said, "Boone, with me? Don't look at the top. Look at the ground 6 feet in front of you and give me one step and then another one. You don't have to climb the hill. You just have to take the step you're on." She fell in. Her breath was ragged and her steps were short, but she fell in, and we climbed the ugly grade 6 feet of ground at a time, and I talked her through it the way somebody had once talked me through a longer hill in a hallway that smelled of disinfectant. And about 2/3 of the way up, she stopped crying because she had run out of room in her lungs for both crying and climbing, and her body had made the sensible choice. Halfway up the grade, we passed the soldier with the badly rigged ruck, the one I had filed at mile 4, and he was in real trouble now, the strap having done exactly what a bad strap does over 9 miles, and he had finally stopped, bent over his knees, done. Latham started toward him with the reflex of a man about to bark, and I caught his eye and shook my head 1 inch, and to his enormous credit, he understood, and he changed. He knelt beside the soldier instead, and he did not yell, and he loosened the strap and re-ran it the right way over the padding, 90 seconds of work that should have been done at mile 4 and would now save the man the last 3 miles of ruin. And he said something low to him that I could not hear, but could read in the soldier's straightening back. Then Latham got him moving again, walking beside him, and I watched the captain learn, in real time, the difference between running an event and leading the people inside it, which is a lesson some officers take 20 years to learn, and some never do. And he was learning it on a hill at mile 9 because a woman he had called sweetheart had shaken her head 1 inch instead of letting him bark. I have thought since that this was the actual reckoning, more than the citation, more than the turned heads. The citation only told him who I was. The hill taught him who he could be. We crested it together, the private and the captain and me and the soldier with the fixed strap, and at the top, the whole finish opened up below us across the last flat half-mile, the reviewing stand and the small crowd and the stone, and Boone made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, the sound of a person who has just learned something about herself that she is going to keep. "There it is," I said. "You climbed it. Now don't let the downhill make you stupid. Steady all the way in." The last half-mile my leg was exactly as bad as I had promised myself it would be. The blister had opened somewhere on the hill, and every stride now was a bright, small argument, and I had stopped negotiating and simply started paying, which is the final phase of the contract and the one I know best. I do not slow down for it. Slowing down does not make it hurt less. It only makes it hurt longer. And I would rather it hurt a great deal for a short time than a moderate amount forever. That is, I have come to think most of what I believe about most things. I crossed the finish at my unimpressive pace. Upright, the ruck still cinched, the watch still running, and there was a small sound from the crowd, applause, which I have never known what to do with, and did not know what to do with then, so I nodded once in its general direction and kept walking. Because a finish line is not a place to stand, it is a place to walk through, and the thing I had come 12 miles to reach was another 40 yards on. The stone sat at the edge of the field under a bare tree, a plain gray marker with his rank and his name and his dates cut into it in the sober lettering the Army uses for its dead. Specialist Milo Hartley, 22 years. I walked to it and I stopped. And I took off my cover and I stood there in the cold with the sweat going icy on my back, and I put my hand flat on the top of the stone, which was colder than the air. And I did the thing I had come to do, which I am not going to fully describe, because some things you carry 12 miles are not for anyone else. They are just between you and the name. And I will tell you that I told him I was sorry, which I have told him 10,000 times, and which does not get easier, and which I have stopped expecting to get easier. And I will tell you that I told him I had not gotten faster in 13 years, that I still could not save him in any of the versions, that I had finally stopped running the versions mostly, and that this had cost me more than the leg had. And I will tell you that I told him about the private on the hill, because he would have liked that. He would have laughed his whole unembarrassed laugh at the idea of me giving a 19-year-old the same speech somebody gave me. And I stood there and let myself imagine the laugh. And it was the closest thing to peace I have felt in a long time. A voice behind me said, "Ma'am." I turned, and it was a staff sergeant, mid-30s, solid through the chest, with a face I had last seen 22 years old and screaming in a folded truck door. And I knew him before my mind had finished telling me who he was, the way you know a voice from a dream. "Merc," I said. "Yes, ma'am." His jaw was working. He was stationed here, I would learn, had been for 2 years, rucked this memorial every year, and had never once known that the officer in the citation was still alive and in the army, because the citation said an officer and a name, and it had never occurred to him that the name and the officer he remembered were the same person, that the person who pulled him out of that door had gone on to become a lieutenant colonel who would one day walk 12 miles to stand at Milo's stone. "You carried me, ma'am," he said, and his voice broke on it. This solid, squared-away sergeant broke clean in half. "I've had 13 years and a whole life and 2 kids because you carried me, and I never got to. I never got to carry anything back. I have thought a great deal about what to say to a thing like that, and I have never found the right words, because there are no right words. There is only the truth, which is smaller than the moment wants and is all you have." "You don't carry it back," I said. "That's not how it works. You carry it forward. You go find somebody stopped at the bottom of a hill, and you get them to the top, and that's how you carry it back. That's the only way anybody ever carries it back." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I named my daughter after him, middle name. Milo doesn't work for a girl, so we did Miles. She's 4. He looked at the stone. "I never told anybody why. My wife thinks it's just a name I liked." He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, unashamed now, past the point of being ashamed. "I should have told somebody. He should get told about, more than once a year at a ruck." "Then tell her," I said, "when she's old enough. Tell her exactly who she's named for and what he was doing when it happened. That's carrying it forward, too. That's most of what it is, actually. Making sure the name gets said by people who weren't even there." He nodded, hard, the way you nod when you cannot speak. And then he did the thing that undid me, which was that he came to attention at the stone, at Milo's stone, next to me, and the 2 of us stood there at attention in front of a name for a long moment in the cold. And that was the last salute, though I did not know to call it that yet. I counted the cost, standing there. Not the medals. The medals are nothing. They sit in a drawer. I counted the mornings, the 4,000 and some mornings of the ritual in the parking lot with the dome light on, the socket and the pin, and the honest conversation with the ground. I counted the versions I had finally stopped running. I counted Milo, who was 22 and always would be. And I found that I could set some of it down onto the stone and leave it there. Not all of it. You never get to leave all of it, but some. And that I would drive home lighter by exactly the weight of the part I had left behind. The relationships resolved in the direction they had earned, which is the only direction I have ever trusted a resolution to go. Captain Latham found me by my truck as I was breaking down the leg, sitting on the tailgate again, the dome light unnecessary now in the full morning. He stood at a respectful distance until I looked up, and then he came the rest of the way, and he had his cover in his hands, and he had, I could see, finally built the apology into the right shape. "Ma'am," he said, "I decided you were the most obvious thing about you, and I closed the file. I disrespected you, and I did it loud, in front of soldiers who look to me to know how it's done. I was wrong about who you are, and I was wrong about how I do my job, and I'm going to be thinking about which one of those is the bigger problem for a long time." He stopped. "That's the apology. It's not about how I feel. I owed you the plain version, and there it is." It was a good apology. It was, in fact, a better apology than most people twice his age are capable of, and I have received apologies from generals that were worth less. I let it sit for a second so he would know I had actually received it and not just waved it off, because being waved off is its own small insult, and I was not going to do to him what he had done to me. "Accepted," I said. And then, because an apology accepted and left there is a transaction, and I have never been interested in transactions, I gave him the other half. "You want to fix it? Here's how you fix it." Somewhere out there is the next soldier who's going to walk up to your line looking like the wrong thing. Too small, too old, too quiet, wrong shape, wrong leg. And you're going to feel that same easy certainty you felt this morning, that you already know the whole story. When you feel it, I want you to remember standing at that stone, and I want you to be the reason that soldier gets waved to the front and not off the field. You do that for the rest of your career, every time, and we're square. More than square. He looked at me, and something in his face had come loose from its moorings and was resettling into a better arrangement, and he said, "Yes, ma'am. Every time." "Good," I said. "Now go find your private." Boone. She did the whole 12, and she climbed that hill after she'd already quit it in her head, which is harder than never quitting. Tell her you saw it. She needs to hear it from the man with the clipboard, not just from me. He almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Boone herself came by a few minutes later, sent, I suspect, though she pretended she had wandered over on her own. She stood there twisting her cover the way Latham had, the family resemblance of people working up to something. "Ma'am," she said. "How do you, She gave up on the sentence and tried a different one. "I want to do more than they think I can. And everybody keeps telling me what I can't do, and this morning I watched you just not argue with any of them. You just did it. That's the whole trick," I said. "You stop arguing. Arguing means you've agreed that it's up for a vote. It was never up for a vote. What you're capable of is a fact, and facts don't need your permission and they don't need theirs. You just go put the fact where people can see it, and you do it enough times, and eventually the room catches up. Sometimes it takes a while. It's worth the wait. Can I ask you one more thing, ma'am?" She had found some nerve in the 12 miles that she had not had at the start line. "This morning, when the captain said what he said, you didn't even. Your face didn't change. How do you do that? Because when people say things to me, my face does everything, and then they know they got me." I thought about how to answer that honestly, because it was the realest thing she had asked, and she deserved better than a poster slogan. "Your face is going to do everything for a few more years," I said. "That's all right. It's not weakness. It's just youth, and it wears off exactly as fast as it should, and not one day faster. So don't go trying to hurry it. But here's the thing to hold on to while you wait. The reason my face doesn't change isn't that I've trained it. It's that what he thinks of me stopped being information a long time ago. When you truly stop believing that a stranger's opinion is news about you, your face relaxes on its own, because there's nothing to defend. You can't fake that with a straight face. You have to actually stop believing them. And you will, a little more every year, especially on the years somebody's wrong about you and you go on and prove it quietly. Every one of those adds up. Your face will catch up to your spine. Give it time. She was crying again, and this time she did not fight it, which I took as the better sign of the two. I gave her my card, which has a phone number on it that I actually answer. And I told her that when some board or some man with a clipboard tried to tell her the shape of her future, she could call me, and I would tell her the truth, which is that the shape of your future is not theirs to hand out. Then I finished packing the leg, and I closed the tailgate, and I drove out the way I had come in, past the same gate where a young soldier had once, 13 years and one lifetime ago, been the kind of person who would have believed the man with the clipboard. I drove out lighter than I had driven in. Lighter by exactly one name, or by the part of one name I had been able to leave on a cold gray stone under a bare tree, which is not the same as the whole of it, but is not nothing. And on that particular morning, it was enough. I want to say something to you now, directly, because you have come this far with me, and you would not have come this far if some part of this were not also about you. If you have ever stood at a threshold, a gate, a door, a start line, a hiring desk, a room full of people who had already decided what you were before you opened your mouth, and if someone there measured you by the part of you that looked broken or wrong or too small or too late, I want to tell you what 13 years and 12 miles taught me about that moment. You do not have to win the argument at the gate. You do not have to make the man with the clipboard understand. You cannot, usually, and the trying is the trap, because the moment you begin to explain yourself, you have agreed that your presence was a question. It was not a question. It was never a question. Let him think what he thinks. Set the word down on the cold grass between you and decline to pick it up, and walk to the line, and take the step you are on, and then the next one, and do not stop at the bottom of the hill to look up at it. The quietest proof outlasts the loudest doubt. Every single time, it does not always outlast it quickly, and it does not always outlast it in front of the people you most wish were watching, and sometimes the recognition comes years late, or at the wrong finish line, or not at all. But the fact of what you are does not expire while it waits to be seen. It just keeps being true, patiently, the way a name cut into stone keeps being true, until the morning the room finally turns its head. And when it does turn, be gracious, not because they earned it, because you did. Because the person who takes the small, clean revenge gets to be right for an afternoon, and the person who declines it gets to be free for a life. And I have watched enough people choose the afternoon to know exactly how much it costs them. Carry the ones you can. Forgive yourself slowly for the ones you couldn't. And when you find someone stopped at the bottom of a hill, do not walk past them at your unimpressive pace. Fall in beside them and tell them to look at the ground 6 feet ahead and give them one step and then another one. That is the last salute. It is not the one they give you when they finally understand who you were. It is the one you give the people you carried and the ones you could not, every morning, for the rest of your life, quietly, whether or not anyone is there to see. The end.